almost sacred place in American culture. We have spent Saturdays watching football in the fall and March Madness in the spring. But we've watched these through a very specific lens. The lens of the pure, dedicated student athlete playing purely for the love of the game and the honor of their university. But today, I want to pull back the curtain on that nostalgic image. The landscape of college sports has changed over the past few years. To be able to understand what the NCAA is doing, I need to give you some basic information. Name, image, and likeness, or commonly known as NIL, is defined as agreements that allow college athletes to legally monetize their personal brand through endorsements, paid social media posts, autographic signings, and appearances. So basically, it is when an athlete gives the right to their name, image, and likeness to brands or collectives, which are university-backed organizations. So for example, if Nike had an NIL deal with a basketball player, that Nike can use the college or the athlete's image to advertise a new shoe, and that athlete will get paid. So I want you to imagine an 18-year-old freshman entering college. Before they have ever stepped foot into a lecture hall, opened a textbook, or taken their very first college exam, they are negotiating six-figure NIL contracts, meeting with professional sports agents, and negotiating multi-year compensation through the transfer portal. This isn't the life of a traditional student athlete. This is the life of a professional athlete who happens to take a couple college courses. The era of the true amateur is over. What is amateurism? Amateurism is the practice of participating in a sport or activity as a hobby or for personal pleasure rather than for financial gain. This means that in an amateur sports league, athletes are playing the sport purely for the love of the game and not for financial gain. That doesn't sound like what is happening right now in the NCAA. Before we talk about what is happening now, let's talk about what the history of the infamous amateur league. For nearly a century, the NCAA stood firmly on amateurism. Under the historical framework, most notably codified in Bylaw 12, athletes were strictly prohibited from receiving any form of compensation, directly or indirectly tied to their athletic performance. The rules were simple. Athletes were students first. They received tuition, room, and board through their athletic scholarships, but that was it. If an athlete accepted a gift from a booster or a few $100s for a signed autograph, it resulted in immediate loss of eligibility. The NCAA justified this by insisting that the primary objective of a university athletic program was educational and personal character development, and not for financial exploitation or profit. Over the course of this presentation, I'm going to be backing up this claim by looking at the three attributes of professional sports leagues that, interestingly enough, seem to match with the college athletics. The professional compensation, the free agency market, and the business infrastructure. To help bring some real-world experience, I contacted Ava Fitzmaurice, who is the assistant softball coach at Fairfield University. She played 5 years of collegiate softball, 3 for University of New Haven, and 2 were for Siena. She has been awarded many athletic and academic awards. She has earned her master's degree in business from Siena and has been coaching D1 softball since 2024. Ava brings a great perspective on the subject because she was an athlete through the NCAA changes from pre-NIL to the beginning of NIL. And she has been coaching during a time of large changes for collegiate sports. So let's dive into the first major argument for why the NCAA is becoming professionalized, which is professional compensation. For decades, critics have pointed out the hypocrisy of the NCAA. Conferences and universities were generating multi-billion-dollar revenues through massive TV contracts and corporate sponsorships, while the athletes, who were doing all the work, were receiving no pay. While the introduction of NIL helped athletes get the money they deserved, the NCAA has gone too far with how athletes are getting compensated, and now the structure is becoming identical to professional sports. Ava gave me some great insight on her first experience with NIL. In her junior year of college, NIL deals started to get more popular. So when she attended Siena, she scored 2 NIL deals with a local company and a clothing company. Her friends from the women's basketball team, however, scored deals through Dunkin' Donuts, car companies, and jewelry stores. Ava also mentioned that Siena gave out stipend checks through the school's NIL clubs. This is a primary example of those college-backed NIL collectives that gave athletes money without directly paying the athlete. Ava played college softball before the NCAA changed a lot of the compensation rules, but the core is the same: athletes getting paid for their performance. The big shift towards professionalism occurred through the House versus NCAA court settlement. This historic legal decision effectively brought an end to the NCAA's strict, decades-old restriction on direct player compensation. The settlement restructured the financial system by giving universities the option to share revenue that they made through ticket sales, TV rights, and sponsorships directly with their student athletes. Universities transitioned away from traditional educational funding frameworks and stepped right into commercial, professional sports labor model. Players are now receiving a base pay through colleges and receiving their endorsements through NIL, which is almost identical to how professionals are being paid. Under this new revenue sharing model, universities can now distribute roughly $20.5 million directly to their athletes. That is not a scholarship fund. That is a team payroll. It links player income directly to the university's revenues. Because of this link, universities are trying to raise money to be able to pay for their athletes. For example, the University of Tennessee has implemented a 10% talent fee added onto ticket prices. When a university explicitly adds a line item on your ticket invoice called a talent fee to pay for their players, they're running a professional sports franchise and not an amateur team. Here you can see some of the top NIL valuations of collegiate athletes. These are only NIL deals and not include the colleges that are paying the athletes on top of that. So you can see some of the top ones are 5.4 million, and then there's 4.2 million. And then we go to the NBA G League, which is the developmental league for the NBA. Their players are getting paid, the top players are getting paid $500,000. Or the top UFL players, which is the developmental league for the NFL, are getting paid $250,000. Based on what Ava said, why would an athlete move into the professional league? To get a deeper look, let's compare NCAA models with minor league athletes. Top NCAA athletes can make anywhere from $1 million to $5 million plus, and minor league athletes can make anywhere from $40,000 to $500,000. NCAA players get prime-time national television exposure on major networks, giving their personal brands big exposure, while minor leagues are often regulated to secondary streaming networks. The financial incentive is upside down. It is now insanely more lucrative to stay as a college student than it is to play in a traditional professional developmental league. I conducted a survey of around 60 people. Of these 60 people, the majority stated that direct payment from colleges is basically a professional salary. And when asked if students making millions of dollars should be considered amateur, the majority said that they should be considered professionals. This shows the support in the argument that being paid professionally means that athletes are no longer amateurs. My second argument is the creation of the free agency market in the NCAA. In professional sports, free agency allows players to test the market, talk to competing franchises, and sign with the highest bidder. Roster construction is a continuous puzzle of fitting the right talent with whatever team is willing to pay. Today, college sports operate almost the same way due to the combination of the transfer portal and massive legal changes. When interviewing Ava, she mentioned that she was in the portal when she transferred from University of New Haven to Siena for her master's program. She also mentioned her experience as a coach, seeing the portal blow up at the end of every season. She also said something very interesting, and that was how coaches are getting around the strict no communication rules. When an athlete is outside of the transfer portal, college coaches are not allowed to communicate with the athlete. This is to ensure fairness between the programs. Ava said that certain coaches will go around the rules by contacting travel coaches or past high school coaches to get the desired athlete. Before diving into the current transfer portal, let's rewind. The NCAA has severely restricted player movement in the past. If an athlete wanted to transfer to another school, they were forced to sit out an entire competitive year, losing a year of eligibility. This rule kept rosters stable and gave universities all the power. However, the House versus NCAA rulings have struck down those anti-transfer restrictions, declaring them as antitrust violations. This has instantly transformed the NCAA into pure, unregulated open market. Today, athletes have unlimited mobility within the transfer window. They are granted immediate eligibility to play no matter how many times they choose to transfer. This environment mirrors the unrestricted free agency models found in Major League sports franchises. These models allowing athletes to make new contracts without being held back by their previous team. The NCAA has also enacted strict roster caps that limit the amount of players per team, which is also identical to professional sports leagues. In a single winter portal, we saw over 6,700 Division I football players enter their names into the transfer portal. These thousands of athletes are operating as true unrestricted free agents. They enter the market to test their valuation, looking for which university can offer them the best financial compensation package with the most amount of playing time. This volume of roster turnover has completely upended how programs operate. Athletic departments are having to re-recruit and buy back their current players when the window opens. Roster building is shifting from recruiting high school student talent to grabbing the top athletes from the portal. This is also decreasing the amount of opportunities for young athletes as they now have to compete with seasoned athletes. This brings us to our third and final argument, which is the business infrastructure of the NCAA. If college sports are still truly an amateur educational pursuit, its administrative, legal, and operational structures would look like the rest of the university's student activities, but it doesn't. The business infrastructure surrounding modern college athletics has fully scaled to mirror professional sports teams. When I interviewed Ava, she talked about how Siena had a board of NIL that made sure all the deals were done through regulation and legally. She also had an NIL club that helped arrange deals with businesses in Latham. This shows the additional business infrastructure added to Siena for NIL. Think back to the old days when a commitment to a high school or college was a simple, standard, non-binding letter of intent. Those days are dead. Colleges and athletes no longer rely on these contracts. Today, modern NIL contracts are highly sophisticated, legally binding marketing and employment-adjacent agreements filed directly after professional sports deals. These documents are packed with complex corporate legal clauses. They feature retention bonuses, which prevent players from entering the portal and transferring schools. They include performance-driven milestone clauses that pay out massive amounts if a player leads their team to the college football playoff or the NCAA Final Four. They map out complex installment payments and detailed termination clauses outlining what happens if a player underperforms or doesn't withhold their media obligations. This isn't student aid, it is a corporate labor contract. Think about the athletes themselves. The average college student might have an academic advisor and a campus career counselor, but modern elite collegiate athletes require an entire corporate support team just to manage their daily lives. They are hiring specialized tax lawyers to navigate multi-state income filings, professional wealth managers to invest their capital, and corporate consultants to manage their brand entities. This changes the fundamental mindset of the individual. They are no longer view themselves through the traditional lens of the student athlete. They are operating as an independent contractor, which is a self-employed entity working on a contractual basis, protecting and maximizing their financial equity. Managing a multi-million-dollar corporate portfolio requires a professional support system that was completely unseen in college sports before. Let's take a look back at my survey. When asked if retention bonuses and milestone payouts aligned with the spirit of amateur college sports, the majority of people said that it turns the student athletes into independent corporate contractors. This further shows that this additional corporate layer is professional and not amateur. It's important to address the primary counter-argument raised by defenders of the current NCAA model. Many sports analysts and administrators argue that the introduction of NIL and open transfer portal haven't destroyed amateurism at all. In fact, they have argued that these changes have actually saved and preserved the traditional college pipeline. Their argument is built on player retention. They point out that before these rules changed, elite young talents faced immense financial pressure. If a superstar football or basketball player grew up in a low-income household, they were heavily incentivized to jump straight into professional leagues or minor league systems the second they were eligible. But now, because of NIL and revenue sharing, these elite players can make millions of dollars while remaining on college campus. These people argue that this financial gain allows athletes to stay embedded in their campus communities, continue pursuing their degrees, and play multiple seasons in front of traditional college fan bases. From their perspective, this stabilizes the educational pipeline of college sports. While that argument does sound convincing on the surface, it falls apart under closer inspection, which brings me to the rebuttal. Yes, it is undeniably true that NIL and revenue sharing keep elite athletes on college campuses for a longer period of time. We have to ask the important question of why they are staying. Their core motivation for staying on campus is fundamentally financial and not educational. They aren't turning down the draft because they want to finish their degrees. They are turning down the draft because their market value as a collegiate athlete is higher than their projected rookie salary in a professional developmental league. When staying in what is legally labeled as an amateur league becomes far more lucrative than entering a professional one, the amateur label is no longer a reality. It is a facade. Roster retention driven entirely by financial compensation is the ultimate proof of a professional marketplace, not an educational one. Going back to the survey, when asked if the counter-argument was valid, the results seemed split. Some agreed that staying in school for a higher payout means the universities have become a professional league. For those who agree, they might not think of the why. Although there are for sure opportunities for these athletes to go and get more education and degrees, are they really? Is that actually what they're doing, or are they in it for the money? Personally, I think at a certain point, the educational benefits lose their shine, and the financial benefits carry the athletes onto staying in the NCAA longer than they would normally. In conclusion, the evidence is overwhelming. Whether we look at the implementation of professional compensation through the House versus NCAA settlement, or the free agency market driven by the transfer portal, or the corporate business infrastructure of legal contracts, registries, and wealth management, the conclusion is clear. The old collegiate amateur model is officially dead. Moving forward, we need to embrace this professional reality to ensure long-term financial sustainability, legal clarity, and fair labor protection for these athletes who drive this multi-billion-dollar business. This was not to argue if athletes should or should not get paid. I believe they should under a more structured system. This was also not to argue if professionalization is good or bad. It is to show how the NCAA has changed drastically from what it was before and how it is now.